Hello, everyone, and welcome to another discussion on the Book of the New Sun. In this case, we are talking about Sword of the Lictor. This is book 3 of the 4 books that constitute the Book of the New Sun. So the previous discussions have been on the Shadow of the Torture, which was on my channel, and then we had the Claw of the Conciliator discussion on Matt's channel. That's Matt on Books. And Paul has been joining us for all of these discussions. He does not currently have a YouTube channel because he's a little busy doing a dissertation, you know, that sort of thing. Who knows, someday, though, we might be blessed with a channel from Paul. But we are going through this story. Is that what we should call it, a story? This
It is a
chronicle.
story.
It is a chronicle. I like that. Chronicle. Memoir.
Just quickly, a little housekeeping, because you just said the 4 books of the Book of the New Sun. It's actually kind of technically 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the 5th one, I don't know how true this is, how correct this is, but I heard that Gene Wolfe wrote the 5th one quite a while after the 4, because the feedback from the 4 was a lot of people going, what?
That's kind of accurate.
Hey, when we get to the end of this, I'm still going to be going, huh?
Okay.
In some places, there are threads that are not tied off. And not all answers are answered clearly, or not all questions are answered clearly. Yeah, it's a surprise, but yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Paul,
I mean, technically, so it was about 5 years later or so, because the Citadel of the Autarch is 83. I believe Earth of the New Sun is, I want to say, I think that goes to press at the end of 88 and gets published in 89, I want to say. Thereabouts.
We're talking about Earth of the New Sun. It's what we're talking about.
Earth of the New Sun gets published about 5-ish years later, and it was the result of Wolfe's editor coming to him and saying, because Wolfe himself felt that it contained everything he wanted to say or that he intended to say, and that astute readers could parse things out. And to be fair, there's a large corpus of very dedicated Gene Wolfe fans who have done just that.
Got the book, yeah.
But
but it has a different title. It has a different title, Earth of the New Sun. So I'm going with it's a different book. So
it is. Well, it is. I mean, it was written specifically as a coda because I mean we can talk more about this next time. But Kim Stanley Robinson has described Wolfe as writing what he calls slingshot endings, where really it ends at the moment of highest tension prior to the propulsion. And that's
true. Yeah.
And just wait, Philip. The last 70-ish pages of Book of the New Sun is still one of the 3 greatest reading experiences of my life.
Wow. All right. I'm looking forward to
4 years later.
So Citadel.
It's also not one of those endings where you think, oh, everything's wrapped up nicely.
Yeah.
Which would be surprising anyway. I mean, we're deep enough into it now that I'd be very surprised if you thought of the 4th book. Oh yeah, okay, so all questions answered.
What are your thoughts, Philip? What are your feelings on modernists? You know, Faulkner, Joyce, all those guys.
I'm down for some modernists for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Then you should be fine. You should be fine.
Yeah.
But it's a similar element of a structure that openly rebels against a nice, clean, closed structure.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, actually. I'm totally fine with that. I don't mind being lost. I spend most of my time being lost, so it's okay.
There you go. There you go.
So
certainly in this series.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I expected it. I am up for the challenge of constantly wondering what's going on and getting half answers sometimes.
Good.
Sometimes not. But I guess we could structure this a little bit, maybe talk about Severian. And I do detect some changes in our protagonist / narrator in this 3rd installment, so Sword of the Lictor, primarily being, I feel like he is a little more reflecting and a little more compassionate than previously. There are
Oh,
certain
yes.
acts of his where he goes back, for example, to heal the kids, the little girl who was dying,
Mhm.
Yeah.
the boy with the thing on his face.
Oh, by the way, we should probably also say for anybody who is
Spoilers, yeah.
listening to this out of the blue, spoilers for the first three
Yeah.
books of Book of the New Sun, not for the fourth one,
Mhm.
but
Back and forth.
for the first three, for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah,
if you
these
haven't read them,
discussions
you should probably
are
go away.
these discussions are full spoiler, and if
Yeah.
you're spoiler tolerant, then stick around. Otherwise,
Yeah.
if you don't want to have the first three books spoiled for you, then yeah, thanks for coming.
See
So,
ya.
Thanks for the clicks.
with that warning, I do feel like Severian is evolving a bit here as a character, that he's becoming more compassionate, more thoughtful. He's still Severian, where, you know, every town or place he ends up in, there's a woman throwing herself at him or something like that. And beautiful woman, of course.
Which he's
Yes.
always happy to take advantage of,
Right.
those
Yes.
opportunities. Yeah. But it's the first, I know exactly what you meant. And the way I was thinking about it is, finally, the world around him means something to Severian,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? Like before that, it was just like he was wandering around and stuff was happening and whatever, you know, it was like he didn't really care that much. He was just wandering from thing to thing. And now he's actually got feelings and concerns, and, you know, he cares about things, and he remembers the kids that need help and goes back and helps them. And he's worried about what's going on with Dorcas, and, you
And he
know,
questions
Yeah.
his profession.
Yeah.
He doesn't kill. What's her name? The woman that he doesn't kill. He's ordered to kill her, and of course he has a little relationship going with her, or if you want to call it that, little spling. I guess.
well, a little fun in the alcove, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wouldn't quite call it a relationship.
No,
Yeah.
I guess that's a slight exaggeration. A little fling, but then he doesn't follow through. Whereas previously he was unquestioningly executing
Yeah.
people he was told to execute, and this time he's like,
Yeah.
he hesitates. So this is a serious evolution, I think, in his character.
Yeah,
I would
especially
agree.
since it basically ruins his sort of comfortable life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big thing that's happening, right? Is that Severian, you know, arguably Shadow the Torturer is
Syriaca.
Oh,
yeah.
yes, Syriaca. Yeah.
So Shadow the Torturer arguably is Severian kind of trying to promote, at least to himself. He's telling us, right? He's saying, "This is my situation. I'm in the guild of the torturers, so forth and so on." And then the latter half of the book of Shadow of the Torturer is Severian encountering a larger world, and then Claw the Conciliator is more of that world, basically impinging upon Severian and challenging everything he's ever believed about the world. And now that he's so removed from Nessus and he's being told to do things, and he's seen enough of the world to make him question, why do I do what I do?
Hmm.
And then, like, we're starting to see some self-actualization, I think, is what we're getting at. And so it's possible, like with Syriaca, with this fling he has, is that is Syriaca, right?
Yeah.
But he's possibly just trying to. He's like, well, I mean, ostensibly, I mean, most likely he was having sex with what's her name, Thecla, back in Shadow the Torturer, and that was fulfilling to him. And now he's seemingly trying to, he's trying to have that experience again. He's like, well, I had sex before, it was great for me. Oh, this isn't fulfilling. Like, I'm not really enjoying this, but it's causing him to question and think about things, so that maybe I don't have to kill her though. Like the last woman who I had sex with, I ended up getting killed, and now maybe I can change that. Or not the last one, because there's
Not the
Dorcas
last
in the
one. I was going to
meantime.
say him and Dorcas have definitely been having sex the whole time. I mean, that was also to me, and I'm not sure how much of this is in the text or how much of this is me projecting my own thoughts, but the fling at the party with Syriaca is essentially him betraying Dorcas.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's in a very committed regular relationship with Dorcas.
Yeah.
It's not just they're having a bit of fun, but it's a real relationship. They live in a room together, you know, and
It's true.
it's basically him betraying her. And I think there's some of that in him not enjoying Syriaca as well.
He feels
know,
You're right about that.
He's realizing he's committed in a way to another woman.
Yeah.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah.
He's
He's
hurt
not a
Dorcas
dude, man.
before. He's hurt Dorcas before when he had the other fling with what
Jolenta?
the Valletta. Yes, I was going to call her the voluptuous one, but Valletta was her name.
Jolenta.
Oh, Jolenta. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm reading another book with a character called Valletta in it right now. So yeah, Joletta. Sorry. So yeah, interesting. And then also, I think one key development is we get little Severian in this book, which,
yes,
for a millisecond, he was like a dad figure, and then little Severian gets burnt to a crisp. I'm like, whoa, wait, what is it?
Like,
That's not
chapters later.
Yeah.
Chapters later, it's like, oh, Severian's kind of become a dad, and he's got this weirdly coincidental kid named Severian, and he's Ash.
So little Severian is kind of a reflection of himself, at least from his perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
This vulnerable orphan now kid, because his family's been slaughtered by the alzabo.
Alzabo, yes.
Oh my goodness, those things. I don't want to meet one of those ever. Thank you very much.
One of the two most terrifying creatures I've ever seen in science fiction. That and the Shrike.
Yeah, I was going to say the Shrike has got to be the other one.
Shrike.
Yeah, the Shrike.
I agree.
The Shrike is super terrifying.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read Hyperion more than 20 years ago, and I'm still scared.
I read it for the first time last summer.
4 or 5 times.
Good.
It's like one of my favorite science fictions ever.
Rightly so.
And it's my most recommended book. I've converted like at least 20 people into Hyperion fans.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, what do you guys?
Alzabo is like, whoa, it's skin crawling.
It is so scary.
Yeah.
Nasty. The idea of, so what makes it nasty is not getting eaten. It's the idea of a piece of you surviving in this creature, which is very much aligned with this whole theme of identity and memory and the nature of identity being wrapped up in memory. So is that you after you've been eaten by an alzabo? Is that you in there? Is that Thecla inside Severian, in fact? Or is it, what is the nature of this, right? Yeah.
So the pharmacon that was referenced in Shadow of the Torture, and then that was used at Vodalus's Black Sacrament when they consume Thecla's flesh, is the core component of it is the glands of the alzabo.
Right.
And so this is now how that is happening, is through this creature, or through an aspect of this creature that is being distilled.
I thought it was really interesting in this book, because in the past we've heard about that, like, there was the bit where they eat Thecla and get her memories, and then there was the alzabo and attack in past books. But so far it was only like the alzabo somehow gets the person's voice, but it wasn't really clear what else was going on. But in this one, the alzabo eats part of the family, and then the monster, after eating someone in the family, goes and defends the rest of the family from other dangers.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is, it's not just memories, it's not just the voice, it's some sort of consciousness.
Which leads me to the question, how much of Severian's development, how much of what we've observed as his increasing compassion, his increasing awareness of others, is a result of Thecla's presence within him? In other words, he literally has another perspective.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, although I wouldn't say that she came from an extremely compassionate place where she was to start with. I personally, my experience of it was more just like, he didn't have any compassion because he lived in a world that was about this big.
Right.
And he had a very clear function, which was to torture and kill people. And that was it.
That's not conducive to a compassionate life.
But at least for him, it didn't seem to have been. But then suddenly he's out in the world and there are things happening, and he has an effect on people outside of this contained little regulated world he used to be in. And he sees the consequences of his actions, and he sees people suffering because of him and because of his action or inaction. And I was always kind of feeling like it was just him learning through his experiences, you know,
I
that he's
think
getting to a
Dorcas
point where he
too.
can relate to normal people, you know.
And Dorcas plays a role in that too, I think, where
Yeah.
she does get him thinking about his profession and
Yeah.
her reaction to his profession in what's the name of the city where his
Thrax.
Thrax, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Where this was like a quest, right? The first two books was this
Yeah.
quest to get to Thrax, and we get to
It's
Thrax,
the
and then-
the road to Thrax. Yeah.
then we're not there for very long, really, at
Nope.
all. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
We're there a little longer than Severian had a son, but not much longer.
yeah. So it's an anti-quest. But
Yeah.
like that moment in Monty Python and the Holy Grail when they're like, let's go to Camelot, and then they have that silly song, and then they're like, no, let's not go there. It's
Let's
a
not
silly
go.
place, you know?
It's a silly place.
That's true. Good point.
Yeah, I mean Dorcas the whole time. I don't think I'm widely enough read to pick up on lots of symbolism. Like when I look through this book, which breaks down a lot of the symbolism, I look at it, I'm like, what? That was what? Really? I don't get that stuff. I believe that Wolfe was smart enough that it's in there and it's intentionally in there, but I don't get it a lot. But one of the really obvious symbolic kind of things was Dorcas is life and Severian's death, right?
Yeah.
And he's all of the dark sort of threatening things, and she's kind of virginal and she's reborn, and you know that was really clear, and she's having an influence on his death aspect, so to speak. You know,
Paul, any
and I
thoughts?
mean it becomes really blatant in this book as well.
Yeah.
It becomes clear that she was actually a corpse in the lake.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
She coughs up a lead slingstone,
Yeah.
which was used to
Yeah.
weight her body so it wouldn't float. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She
we
was
suspected
definitely.
that.
Yeah.
And it
I mean,
was the
basically,
claw,
whenever
the
anything
claw
weird
that,
happens with a dead person,
yeah,
it's because the claw is somewhere nearby.
right.
Yeah.
Always.
So
All the way
Paul,
through the
do
book.
you want to share any thoughts on Dorcas and Severian there?
I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, so we definitely have a strong set of binaries at work, right? We have male and female, life and death. You know, Severian is the shadow of the torture. He becomes the shadow of the torture in the first one, like literally in terms of wearing the cloak and becoming an executioner, but also like has a more symbolic resonance in that respect. I'm also thinking about how the first chapter of the whole book of the New Sun is titled Resurrection and Death. And then near the end of Claw the Conciliator, we have the play, which is Eucatastrophe and Genesis, which would be end of the world followed by start of the world. And so there's always there's a consistent reversal. Normally it's one precedes the other. You know, in a more traditional sense, it would be about life before death, and here it's death before life.
Yeah.
And Severian, arguably, you could approach either one. Was he ever alive prior to going to Thrax, or was his life too scripted by forces outside of himself? In which case, he's now alive because he's making more choices. Or was he so was he just not alive, or was he actually in a way dead? And I think there's something I might return to that one next conversation, when I can go full throttle up and stuff. But I think there's something to be said about there's an element of really things have to die before they become what they should be in this series.
It's also kind of a reflection of the entire world. Like the
Yeah.
current state of the story is the world is dying.
Mhm.
And there's all of this mythology about the world being reborn, the sun being reborn and stuff, but now is death.
Yes. And you know, like in some ways, maybe are the victims of the alzabo then perhaps in a way more vital after they have been mixed into the analeptic and stuff like that. And you know, debates to be had about that later, I think. But there's
See, I
definitely
knew
this
it. I
weird
knew it,
reversal.
Paul. I knew you were on the alzabo's side.
I mean,
I knew you were a closet alzabo sympathizer.
you're just fake news, Matt. The fake news booktube.
So we do move on from the alzabo to Severian's journey with little Severian through the mountains
For about 5 minutes.
for about 5 minutes, and we lose little Severian. He has his cameo.
Zap.
And soon after, we do meet this curious character, the two-headed fellow, whose names I'm sure mean something, and it must be referenced in your little book there, Matt.
Yeah, I'm just looking for it because I flew over it before we started. But continue.
Yeah, Typhon and Pieton.
Yes, Typhon
Yeah.
is the dominant character there, and he's taken over the other poor fellow's body, who's through basically facial expressions gets it through to Severian, you need to kill this you need to kill me.
Please kill us.
Please
Yeah.
kill me.
Yes.
Pretty cool moment when Severian goes for it and smashes not Typhon's nose, who reacts to defend himself, but neglects to defend his other head. And so crack, that was a clever moment on Severian's part, I thought. But what do you guys make of Typhon and all that?
So this is an important scene for me. I remember distinctively, this was the moment when Book of the New Sun started making sense to me.
Wow.
Oh, really?
Because
I need to hear this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Please explain.
Okay, so I believe I'm the only practicing Christian in the room right now, correct?
Yeah, although I grew up a
Yeah.
practicing Christian, so yeah.
I
So
also
I don't
grew up
know.
Christian, but I've just for like 30 years. So
So I don't know if either of you guys caught Typhon. The conflict between Typhon and Severian is directly modeled off of the Temptations of Christ, right?
Right. Yes.
Because
Okay. Yeah, I buy that.
okay, so the story is clearly
which also, by the way, exists in Buddhism. Shortly
Oh,
before
really?
Buddha achieved
Sure.
enlightenment, Mara, which is basically all of the suffering of the world, it personified, came to Buddha and said, it's basically
Interesting.
exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Cool. And so the text is clearly bringing us to a moment where Severian is basically like this. I think is his most important choice in terms of he fully turns away from a life that is purely material, where he embraces a sense of meaning beyond himself.
Okay.
Now, and Typhon, right? What does Typhon stand for? Typhon is the guy who was the king of Earth back when humans were starfaring, and he's the one, and he instigated a aggressive imperial project conquering worlds.
Right.
And so Typhon is all in very many ways he symbolizes the most horrid elements of what human willpower can do, as it were. I think that's really important, is the fact that a lot of the other bad things we see throughout the series, even though there's a war that we've been keeping told about and we're going to see happen more directly in the final volume, but in many ways those are big historical machinery of work, right? And it's just people doing their things. Typhon is someone who actually actively, willfully sought to bend history to his will, and to impose his will upon the world. And so Wolfe is also kind of acknowledging there's both macro and micro levels of historical forces at work.
Cool.
But Severian has to make the choice, and he decides how is there anything that Typhon does that isn't just absolutely disgusting, including strangulating Severian with one hand while jerking himself off with the other.
Yeah. Ooh.
That
was not
just
a pleasant scene at all.
No, he is so grotesque.
Yeah.
In every way. And also Typhon is someone who has we see both in Typhon and later and in Baldanders as well, efforts to violate their own humanity, right? Deliberate efforts to change their mortal trajectory.
It's all
Typhon is
about
trying to
their
be
ego. It's about their ego, isn't it?
exactly that. There's an element of I don't want to die. I don't want to be weak. I am going to do what it takes, and I don't care. There is no. Everyone else can pay the cost of my perpetuity. Which again, I'll have more to say
And
about that.
there's
next
no
time.
there's I thought it was also a kind of a funny paradox, because once you actually do, like, once Typhon is alive again and you realize what he's done to try and make himself immortal, but he died,
Yeah,
and Severian brought him back.
yeah,
You know, and then
and
Severian gets to the point where he's like, I think I have to kill you again.
yeah. The claw seems to be the one thing that can perpetuate life or restore life with possibly without cost,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
that
you
seems to
just
be
want
more
to say,
acceptable.
you just want to start bringing back the right people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Bringing back Typhon was a bit of a mistake.
Can we avoid bringing back megalomaniac tyrants, please? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So anything thought or further thoughts on that section, either Paul or Matt, on the Typhon section? Is there a reference in the name, by the way? Are we talking about any mythological?
In this book, it doesn't actually mention anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it mentions little Severian dying is sort of like a reference to the Bible in the unwitting sacrifice of Isaac.
Oh.
There's also a reference to another author and a story. Actually, in the Typhon and Phaeton chapter, the main thing they mention is that Severian admits to jealousy over the deep feeling of Dorcas for Jolenta.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
This adds a revenge twist to his Jolenta tryst.
Interesting.
In addition to lust and his contrarian nature. But yeah, they don't really mention anything about the names.
Okay. Okay. I do find it interesting that little Severian dies in the course of Severian trying to get gold. That it's a moment of, yes, there's a practical necessity because they're trying to survive, but it also seems like he's getting a little greedy here about this vast amount of gold, and
Yeah,
you know, the kid pays the price.
yeah, it seems a direct consequence of greed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Touching things he shouldn't be doing, and it kind of again reminds us that there's a lot of stuff in this world that no one really understands. There's a lot of like artifacts lying around that no one really understands why they're there or what they were for or anything.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing to me with the introduction of Typhon, and even before Typhon, the resurrected person, this mountain that is carved to look like him.
Yeah.
And then they find him, and there's all these devices and everything everywhere. And then he starts going on about who he was and what his goals are and all of this sort of stuff. It's just like it broadened the world suddenly so much.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, okay, so there was this tyrant emperor thousands of years ago who had the power to make the gold on his giant statue zap people somehow, kind of magically.
Yeah.
And also to carve an entire mountain in his likeness. And,
Yeah.
you know, started me thinking about like, wow, okay, so a lot of time has passed and a lot has changed. You know?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Nobody even knows who this guy is anymore. You know?
Yeah.
That's like
it could also be,
right? The poem Ozymandias by Shelley, you know, similar kind of, I think, thing going on there, right? Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair.
There.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, Typhon is a reference to one of the Titans that Zeus had to expel.
I was wondering, okay, was Gene Wolfe trying to say something by using that name? And I guess
wasn't there also something with one of the Titans in his eye? Wasn't one of the Titans bound to a rock and there was a vulture that was
that's Prometheus.
That's Prometheus, yeah.
But wasn't Prometheus one of the Titans?
Yes.
He was.
Yeah, the one that stole fire for humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the end of this whole episode, Severian climbs out the eye. you know, and
Yeah.
I was just sort of, I don't know.
Oh.
I mean, it's not necessarily a meaningful connection, but I was
Yeah.
thinking about Titans and Prometheus and the Eye, and you know,
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so
Yeah.
any further thoughts on our friend Typhon, our two-headed buddy here? Or shall we move on to the next significant moment in the story, which is
wait a sec. Actually, sorry,
Oh.
it's mentioned a little bit later. It's mentioned in the I think the chapter where he dies. It
okay.
says in Greek myth, Typhon and Python are two monsters associated with each other. Typhon was killed by Zeus, Python by Apollo. Typhon and Python were very close, and Homer says Python was the nurse of Typhon. When Apollo killed Python, he won the tripod Triscula, which is the name of Severian's dog.
Interesting.
Wolfe seems to be using this material such that Python is the human form. Pyaton is the human form of Python.
Okay.
Yeah, so there is a name.
I thought there
connection.
might be something.
Yeah.
I haven't figured out where he was going with that, but
Yeah.
okay. All right, very good. All right, so let's move on then, like Severian does, to his next little escapade, which is down by this lake where there are people who are shore dwellers, and then there are the people who live on these floating islands on the lake, and they are at odds with one another. And there's this castle there where we finally get reunited with a couple familiar people who pop into the story again. And this time, there are some interesting revelations about Baldanders being the one actually who created, rather than being the servant of what Dr. Talos. So I got some very interesting things going on. And of course, Severian finds yet another beautiful woman who throws herself at him in the course of this adventure.
Did anyone else see this castle backlit by lightning, like a scene out of an old Frankenstein movie?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And we meet Cacagins, but don't call them that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hierodules.
Yes. Yeah. So
Hierodules.
who wants to take a stab at all of this first? Where do you want to go with all of these? I mean, the Cacagin part was interesting to me, but that's more at the end. So maybe we should talk about the earlier stuff. So thoughts on this part of Severian's adventure, either of you gentlemen?
There was a lot about belief versus science.
Yeah.
That was sort of the foreground idea through this whole sort of scene.
Yeah.
And
the claw being
a
symbol of belief, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in the end, it's Baldander's rejection of faith that dooms him, because he throws the claw over the side, and all the tribesmen are waiting for the torch symbol, signal.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, yeah, I mean, it's blue, but sure, it's a torch, whatever. And they all rush in, attacking. And it's all because Baldander's is like science only. Belief, faith, forget it. Superstition, ridiculous.
Yeah, well, I mean, or is it? I mean, it's because I would argue that science itself is itself a faith of a sort. Like we use science, like the data says this is what it is, so we have faith in this explanation of the data, and science tells us this much, but we then imagine things beyond that, to higher principles and whatnot. But Baldander's is right. Is this sort of science like, no, like what can I control? There's an element of control versus a surrender of control between Severian and Baldander's. I think that's one of the lessons Severian's learning from this particular volume is learning to allow the world to be the world. Like I don't have, yes, I'm an arbiter of death, and that gives me a lot of power in a material world, but maybe I don't have to flex that every time.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I like that. That's a good observation, Paul.
Yeah.
And Severian, of course, another thing that happens here, and it's got to be a fairly symbolic moment, is terminus est meets its terminus.
Yes.
Along with an interesting moment for the claw of the conciliator, which it turns out it's the thing inside the jewel.
Is actually a claw.
Is a little claw of a sort, and that's what has all of these effects, not the jewel itself, which was just basically something that
blue glass.
Blue glass.
Yeah. No, the the scene where Severian takes the broken sword and throws it into the lake. I'm a big Arthur fan, and I'm like,
Yeah.
shortly before dying, Arthur took Excalibur and gave it back essentially to the Lady of the Lake,
Right.
threw it
Yeah.
into the lake before he died. And I
Yeah.
was like, I've read these books before, so I know Severian's not dying soon. But it had a very Arthurian kind of feeling. Also, it felt like him letting go of his identity as a torturer.
Yes.
I agree.
You know, he's like, I'm not this anymore.
Yep. Key moment. Key moment. I mean,
Yeah.
often in fantasy, often when a dude's sword breaks, that's it, right? I mean, that's a huge, I mean, often a harbinger of death, but of big transformation, of moving from one state to another, from death. But in Severian's
It's
case,
like the opposite of Tolkien.
yeah, yeah.
Aragorn gets his broken sword put back together, and
I mean,
then he can be king.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, or other way of looking at it is the fact that Isildur's sword breaks, and that leads to his end, and Aragorn has to create a new sword out of that, right? So he has to hold on. He has to have the memory of that authority, right? But it has to be his.
Yeah.
He can't have his. He can't. And this is a sword that was just given to Severian, and now basically everything. The only thing Severian still has with him of his old identity is the tattered remains of his Fooligian cloak. But his sword is broken, and he's given that up. The claw is no longer in the form that it once was.
Now he looks like this.
Yeah, that's the next book cover.
Yeah,
and that's Severian at war.
Yeah.
Although it's kind of stupid because he's riding around holding the broken Terminus S.
Yeah, which he threw in the lake. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was green. I mean, is he like the Hulk or something here?
He hulks out, yeah. That whole thing. There were gamma rays in Baldander's laboratory,
There you go.
and he just gets really pumped and green.
He looks pumped.
There you go.
Yeah.
But now I am curious though. We're not going to talk there. I don't know if you have points about it. We'll go back to it. The village versus the lake people, the ones who float on the floating islands. But I am very curious to hear your thoughts about the Cacagins and their role in all of this, and what they were doing with Baldanders, and where they go in the end, and all of that, because it gets very interesting. I think at this point.
I have a big question for you two. What's the guy's name? Fulimus or
One of the three.
Famulimus.
That's the short one, or one of the two tall ones? I get them.
Famulimus, the one that he talks to for a long time at the end.
Okay, one of the two tall ones, I think. Yeah.
The one that takes off his masks.
Yeah, masks, plural. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He says to Severian at one point, "We tested you and you failed," or something similar to that. Did you guys get exactly what the test was? Because they're just talking, and at some point he says, "Well, we tested you and you failed," and you're like, "Was there a test?" I missed it.
I feel like this whole thing has been a test of Severian, and I'm not sure who the tester, who is the architect of the test, but I feel like because he is the autarch, the narrator Severian is the autarch, that somehow this has all been a weird kind of test or preparation for him to fulfill that role, and that at the end of all of this, I'm expecting him to be the autarch. But
well, you notice that the Hierodules the whole time are addressing him as my liege.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So they're from the future.
Right. I guess.
Or at least they're capable of time travel or something. You know.
Yeah.
So they know that he's the future autarch already at this point.
Yeah.
And I thought the test was asking him where he got the claw.
Okay.
And he acts like it had nothing to do with him. He said, "I just found it in my bag." And I think that was the test that he failed.
Oh, okay. About where it came from. Maybe. I mean, I get the sense that the claw I'm not necessarily ruling out technology as a explanation for what the claw is and does. I get the
There's no
sense,
magic in the book so far.
yeah. So I do get the sense though that he becomes a kind of regent for Earth, and that these people go around to different planets with inhabitants, and they appoint a regent, an autarch in the case of Earth. And that's what Severian, and they know that, of course, because like you said, they have knowledge of the future. So I just feel like, yeah, that this whole thing is him being set up for this role of being the regent of Earth, and that the regent must know stuff as the regent that the rest of the populace doesn't know about the nature of the universe, and the role that the Caucasians play in governing these various inhabited worlds. I don't know. I'm just conjecturing. But...
So, okay, so I found it, and this is near the end of chapter 34.
Okay.
The wording is peculiar. He says, though you did not now pass our test.
Oh.
Yeah.
He
I
will
meant no
eventually.
less.
Yeah.
So maybe one way of looking at this could be, I'm thinking about in Doctor Who, the first episode of River Song, and it's the end of her life, but it's the first time that he meets her.
Yeah.
And she's talking about like I think it's been a while since I last saw that episode, but I believe her last line is something along the lines of saying how I never knew that our first meeting was also our last, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so there's this element of, if you can literally, on the level of story and plot, if time becomes volatile, where characters can be meeting outside of a shared time frame, designators such as "you did not now pass our test." Again, it's like you will someday, or at least you're supposed to at some point in time, because I think there is something about spoilers, loves.
Okay.
Because the question that Matt is pointing to, if it is yours, where did you get it?
And they talk about it for like half a page. Oh, well, I just found it. And then Baldander's, where did you get it? Da, 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 and it's all very mundane, but it's italicized also. But where did you get it?
Yeah, I think I have thoughts for next discussion.
Good. But he's been trying to return this object all this time too, and that's
which is also something I wondered about. Why do you two think that he feels like he should return it? Because I mean, he's got this amazing thing which is super useful, and he's, up until basically this book, he's been somebody who doesn't really seem to have much of a moral compass, doesn't really care that much about responsibilities or possessions or anything.
right.
But he's always been focused on, I have to return this.
As if it's some good deed that he's trying to accomplish. Yeah.
Or as if he sees himself as not worthy of having it, or, I mean, lots of different.
Or what are the consequences if it falls into the wrong hands, I guess.
Yeah. None of which really seem to fit his character in the first two books.
Right.
Yeah. I will say, so this is something, I don't feel bad mentioning this, only on the grounds that, because I haven't yet read Earth of the New Sun, so it could be it's a very questionable spoiler perhaps, is my understanding is that in Earth of the New Sun, things are set in motion for Severian basically as the autarch to start time travel.
Uh-huh.
I've also heard that, yeah.
Yeah, again, I don't know the details of that, but it raises questions about this element of a test. An architect of said test is that future Severian himself orchestrating certain events.
And is some of this story future Severian time traveled?
Exactly. That's something I have heard whispers about, but I don't know the details of. And so either one, we're meddling with things we shouldn't do, and we're all going to be incinerated like little Severian, or we are just creating a divergent timeline. And either one is kind of exciting, minus the death part. But I want to also point out something else that the Hierodules talk about right after the whole "you did not now pass our test." A couple paragraphs later, they say, "Is all the world a war of good and bad? Have you not thought it might be something more?"
Hmm.
I had not
And
and could only stare. So Severian. No, the idea
very much
never
so.
occurred to me. He's very
And I mean, this is
simple-minded.
something that, yeah, and this is something that like one of the common criticisms of Lord of the Rings, right, is that it breaks down too cleanly into its binary of good and evil, and then we have a reaction in the form of things like the Black Company and Malazan and others trying to muddle
Elric.
that.
Yeah.
Elric, oh yes, um, but I think Wolf is
Volkar
trying to get
hated,
something.
hated Lord of the Rings.
He did indeed that, yeah. Though
So
actually less for the morality thing and more for other things, but
Yeah,
I feel
he didn't
he's
necessarily
trying,
hate the book. He hated the politics of the book.
right.
yeah. Well, I
So
hated the style of the
Wolf is
book.
interesting though,
Yeah.
because like Tolkien, Wolf was a devout Catholic.
Yeah.
Yes.
So where do you see him falling in this, Paul?
Yeah. So I think so I kind of want to bring a few different threads and see if I can arrive at some sort of a semblance of an idea here. So one is that remember Wolf is a convert to Catholicism. He converts after he goes to as a in his early 20s he goes to the Korean War, suffers all kinds of trauma, um, comes home and like he there's records about like if he heard like a lightning flash, he would think it was like an artillery shell, and he would go to the floor and just like cover his head, and he was very traumatized. He actually credits his wife Rosemary with. He says like just working through things with her really made a big difference in his life, which I was thinking about earlier when we were talking about Severian and Dorcas and the way they influence each other, or the way she influences him at least. But then, because of Rosemary, he does eventually convert to Catholicism. But he was always very avid that he did not convert because of his wife. Like she was the one who just convinced him to take it seriously. But he did all this deep study of theology. He read. He said that like a lot. G.K. Chesterton was really important to helping him work through logical problems he had with certain claims. And so I think that Wolf is trying to argue that, yes, I do authentically and deeply believe this very mystical vision of the cosmos, but I also believe there are ways that I don't believe that it's something as simple as looking around. Like, I recognize that people are too complicated to fit into a simple God Satan dichotomy. And again, like I think we can all agree that Typhon, as I was saying earlier, Typhon is abundantly evil. Like he's perhaps the one truly evil character of this whole story. Like Baldanders is malicious and violent and angry, but he's not evil in the same way that Typhon is. And everything else we've seen, there's lots of there's all kinds of there's a huge spectrum of morality, but it's ultimately people being people along that spectrum.
Old
And
Anders is kind of science gone wrong incarnated.
exactly.
He's
He's
like
kind of
uninterested in the
an
morality of what
Einstein.
he's doing.
Not
Yeah,
Einstein.
Yeah.
Frankenstein.
no,
He's Frankenstein. Yeah,
yeah.
So I'm going
Only
to
his
now
monster
jump.
is himself.
exactly.
I'm going to
Yeah.
jump to a novel that came out just during the same time as this Book of the New Sun. John Crowley's Little Big, which came out in '81,
Hmm.
which is still the most gorgeously written novel I've ever read. Like, just on a prose level, oh freaking crap, it's amazing. So, but Little Big is about uh, characters who live. It's a multi-generational story about people who live in. They call it the Tale, capital T Tale. They are somewhat aware that their lives are fitting into a larger narrative, and they are technically at war with a clan of fairies that are always in the periphery of the story. But it's about this war is not about uh, winning and domination. It's about development and transformation.
Hmm.
And I can say more about this next time as well. But there's this element of good and evil is it's an oversimplification of a dialectic struggle that is happening that on the one hand wreaks a lot of destruction, but might actually hold the key to the salvation of humanity. And that's kind of, I think the Hierodules are getting at that, is it's not about, it's not this linear, we started with creation and we're moving towards Armageddon. It's, and then Armageddon happens and then good wins or evil wins. Either all is destroyed or all is saved. One of the two.
It's just a cycle.
Yeah, so they're setting the grounds for something, a time frame that is both cyclical on a scale that we can barely fathom, but manages to be linear on the deep, immediately human experience.
I also thought it was interesting right after that question, which Severian completely fails to answer and admits to himself, the thought never occurred to me. The first thing the Hierodule does is say, here's my horrible face. And oh, by the way, that's also fake. Here's my beautiful face. And who's the other mask wearer in the entire book?
Well, Severian has a mask.
Severian, yeah, of course. And he wears the mask of death.
Yeah.
And the Hierodule is sort of saying to him, you can be what you want to be, and you can take the mask off, and maybe it's what's under it is also a mask, and calling the whole thing into question, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, good stuff.
He says, all of the monstrous masks you've seen us wear are but your fellow citizens of Earth. An insect, lamprey, now a dying leper. All are your brothers, though you may recoil. And so there's this element of how appearance is something that we use to divide ourselves, but deeper down we are all united. But also, right, like the Hierodule, on a larger structural perspective, they're effectively angels, right? But at first it's this horrible face, and then it is a more pleasant face. If you look at certain strands of Abrahamic tradition, angels are these horrifying, monstrous creatures. But also in other parts of the tradition, they are these sublime perfections at the same time. And so that is possibly happening there, as we're seeing two layers of tradition at work there.
Interesting. If you guys could help me with one thing too, it would be fun.
Please.
Which is, how do we connect the Baldanders and Dr. Talos that we see in Sword of the Lictor with the previous appearances of these two characters? Like, for example, the play that they put on. What was going on in that play that connects that story of creation in a way? And in terms of what it turns out Baldanders is, he's trying not to grow into one of those creatures that has to be in the water, otherwise it dies because it's so big.
But he's also constantly making himself grow so that he can keep living.
Yeah.
Like he's forcing himself through science to grow.
Yeah. Also, there's the nightmares or the dreams that Severian has when he first meets them, when he sleeps beside Baldanders.
Yeah.
So does all this connect at this point, or do we have some insight, in other words, into Baldanders and Dr. Talos now that they've been unmasked, as it were, and they appear to be much more villainous, although they were kind of creepy, frankly, all along.
Yeah.
Kind of creepy. I mean, like, if you weren't picking up on them being creepy, you weren't reading these books.
Yeah.
They were always kind of at least dodgy. Like,
now they're actually very sinister. I mean, they're doing vivisection on the people from the islands in order to find out, some science.
They're mad scientists.
Yeah. He's a Frankenstein. And his monster, I guess he created as Dr. Talos, so a little guy, right?
Yeah.
That was a question I had in my head as well. I think in this whole scene, this whole chapter, they only call Dr. Talos a homunculus. But are we thinking robot or Frankenstein kind of homunculus?
Well, I'm trying to remember, because I think
I thought robotic, because he mentions, oh, you're kind of made like my old friend, what's his name? Jonas, right?
Yeah.
There was a reference to Jonas there.
Yeah. And also when the Hierodules takes off his masks, Severian puts his hand on the face,
Yeah.
and says it's cool but feels living as opposed to the dry heat of Dr. Talos.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so that moment, it says, so Severian says, I knew a man who was only partly human flesh. And that's when Baldander says a homunculus. So it's also possible that in this story world, homunculus is it is basically what we would call a cyborg.
Right.
And in which case, Dr. Talos, it could be a hint that Dr. Talos is not entirely metal, that he has organic qualities as well.
Right.
Okay.
And so there's that. I think one way of looking at this. So ever since we met Baldanders, there's been an element. There's been a link between he and Severian, right? Like they have that shared dream, this very like Queequeg and Ishmael thing, and there's kind of this unsettledness about that connection. And in the dream, they are Severian is propositioned by scions of I think Abaya, either Abaya or Erebus, one of the two.
I think it's a bio.
Via, I think.
Yeah, effectively, Abaya and Erebus are these like Lovecraftian elder ones, right?
Right.
So if we choose to lean in to the possibility that there's some sort of a Christological and fundamentally Catholic vision of the world at work, at least in Severian's journey. But it's also it's super grounded in a strong sense of reality. Then Severian, if we do see him as a Christ-like figure, as many people do, and I probably more often than not, though a very complicated one, is he's on a journey that, whether deliberately or not, is shaping him to be a type of Messiah character. I would say my take is that the Hierodules are basically like, we're looking for the best candidate right now, and Severian is unwittingly tripping himself through the application process. Baldander seems to be someone who knows that he actually knows what the test is, and he is actively trying to meet all the requirements that are expected of him for the job, as it were, and to satisfy the Hierodules. And so he is, through science, trying to become the person that he thinks the Hierodules wants. And that would be immortal. It's someone who is going to fix Earth, as it were. He will make Earth great again. Mugga. And so, which might explain why Baldander's and Dr. Talos, perhaps it gives us some clues as to how maybe they, like Severian, are just kind of stumbling through their version of this journey simultaneous to Severian when we first meet them. And I guess ideally, like if you wanted to write, the novel from the perspective of Baldander and Dr. Talos, you could possibly extrapolate in that way. It's a fun idea, actually. But that's my take, is that Baldander's is basically, because then after the Hierodules leave, is this whole there can be only one kind of showdown happens. And it seems to be that Baldander's is wanting to displace Severian in the Hierodules perspective.
Okay, so
yeah,
it's
a
personal rivalry then. Yeah.
In the scene where they're all there in the castle, there is sort of a tense kind of jealousy. I don't know, maybe me reading into it, but like this weird kind of jealousy for the Hierodules, attention, respect, admiration, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Well, we have covered a lot. I know that we have missed a lot of things. We didn't talk about what are they called? The anthro something or other that attack the family and end up all dead as well. They've taken out. The alzabo kills most of them. But they've taken out a part of their humanity. And they're basically
they've willingly removed part of their brain.
Yeah, which again I think goes back to these ideas about identity and memory and what makes you a human, perhaps. There's some interesting stuff going on there. So there are other moments I know we've left out here, but anything that you guys want to make sure that we talk about before we finish the discussion?
So there's a passage as I was flipping through last night. The passage that stuck out to me. This is, what chapter is this? And this is in chapter 27. Yeah, on high paths, which is short. Is after the Typhon stuff. But there's this one passage where Severian says, it's in parentheses. He says, that of my own death, which is popularly supposed to be so awful as to be inconceivable, does not much trouble me. It is my life that I find, perhaps because of the perfection of my memory, that I cannot think.
Yeah.
And, earlier in this project, there was a lot of suspicion of Severian's claims to a perfect memory, and I promise I will address that next time. But but this always reminds me of the Borges story, Funes, his memory. I can't remember if I've talked about that before or not, but the long story of that, the short version of that very short story is this guy Funes, he falls off his horse, hits his head, and the trauma causes him to suddenly develop a perfect memory. And so, like, over the following days, he begins to remember everything. He remembers every word he's ever spoken. He remembers every dream he's ever had. He remembers every individual leaf on every individual tree he's ever seen. And it drives him mad. And
I was going to say that would be
end,
very tiring.
it would be. But at the end of the story, the narrator says something to the effect of, I think about my friend Funes, and I think that in the end, he wasn't a very good thinker because he remembered everything so perfectly, and we think through our forgetting, something to that effect.
Huh.
And so I find it fascinating that Severian is saying that for him, one of the great, that at the time that he's writing this chronicle sometime in the future, he says that because I remember everything so perfectly, I can't think about it. And just the way that memory does get in the way of, possibly gets in the way of creativity because of how it does affect us. How, if you can remember everything perfectly, then it can be very hard to I'm just about the anxiety you would have trying to avoid repeating mistakes and whatnot. But if you remember everything that perfectly, you can possibly completely short circuit your ability to make mistakes in certain ways, and that probably is pretty exhausting in its own ways. And again, I'll have more to say about that next time.
Interesting. Yeah. There was also the tale of the boy called Frog, which was the story that Severian reads to little Severian to comfort him. It's a little bit of a Romulus and Remus type moment in here, I guess.
Kind of a Cain and Abel
thing
as well.
Bit of all of that meshed in. Yep. And thematically, I always feel like these stories within the story are trying to tell us something about the bigger picture going on. It's never quite clear to me what it is. But what did you guys make of the tale of the boy called Frog, if anything?
Frog and fish.
Yeah, and the brother fish who ends up dead. The brother fish, that was a little surprise, I thought, that fish ended up a kind of sacrifice for the fertility of the land.
It's chapter 19.
Yeah.
Chapter 19. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all very, it's like the seasons, early summer, a queen beyond earth had a child by a flower.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a highly allegorical story, whatever you make of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know if I got the symbolism much out of it, but what struck me was it feels like we're so far in the future of the world that everything is mixed up. You know, that everything has gotten mixed. Like the two kids get put in baskets and put in a river.
Moses,
you know?
right?
Yeah. Moses, also Arthur, like Mordred was the same thing with Mordred, and it's all of these stories that we've heard, mixed up into one. And it was just, to me, it was mostly interesting world building because it was so clearly samples from so many different stories mixed up, and people don't know it anymore, like all the other stories within stories that we hear.
Well, it also kind of gives some hints about like how the scale of historical time at work, because the story ends with mentioning, for so he had been taught by the naked one who was also called the savage or Squanto. And I'm thinking about that. There's the meme about Cleopatra was closer to the iPhone in time, is closer to the iPhone than she was to the actual building of the pyramids, right? Like, because the Egyptian
Right.
Empire lasts for so long. But we, in our compression of time, we automatically assume no, empires last a couple hundred years. That's it, and so pyramids are built, and then it's the same exact thing when Cleopatra's queen and so forth and so on. Like, well, no, there's enormity of time there, and so similarly, arguably, fish and frog could be. I kind of wonder if those are supposed to like typify like primordial humanity. Like they're the early organisms of the planet, and perhaps the story at least might be suggesting that like the early Puritan settlement of the American continent might be closer to that than it is to Severian's time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh,
All right. Well, there is definitely a lot of exploration of time and the various eons and the inability of the human mind to wrap itself around the scale of all of it. And a sense that things are fleeting, right? We talked about Shelley's poem Ozymandias earlier. It seems like a fairly fitting connection to make in this context as well. So
all of the world building in the entire series just screams lost to me all the time.
Yeah.
It's like everything is a shadow of what it used to be. Everything is not understood by anyone in the world because it's been so long and so much has been lost.
And we kind of reflect that on our own little individual scale too, don't we? In terms of our own identity that we carry with us through, or the narrative that we carry with us through our lives is very much like the narrative of the historical past. A bit convoluted and muddy, and not entirely accurate either. Yeah. So, excellent. Any last thoughts then, gentlemen?
One last thought I want to share. One more return to the topic of memory because I'm so fascinated by this treatment of it. So this is the next chapter actually after the story that we talked about. But there's a passage when Severian says, I am certain I did not sleep, but I used the facility I have for calling forth past time, and so at least in spirit left at that dark place. I believe this is the first time he talks about like actively deploying the powers of memory, right? Often he talks about, I remember this event happened, but usually the idea of the perfect memory is mainly grounded in the future Severian who is beginning to write or who is writing. And I just want to point out that here he says like he's consciously, actively doing that here. And this is sometime after the dinner with Vodalus, after he has partaken of the alzabo analeptic. And I do think that, I guess I'll have more to say about this next time, as I keep saying, but I believe that Severian did not have a perfect memory as a child. I think that his exposure to the alzabo analeptic has, over time, caused him to has rewired his brain in the same way that Funes' trauma in the Borges story is made to have a perfect memory.
Oh, interesting.
One of the I don't know if this is really a refutation of what you just said, but because I actually read this, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. So I sat down with my trusty little chapter guide with the summaries and read through it just before we started. And this book, compared to the previous two, had the most notations of where Severian's memory mistakes were. Like in this chapter, he says that the pouch that he wears the claw in is made of human skin.
Yeah.
And earlier he said it was made of doe skin. So either maybe what you're saying is exactly right, And everything after the alzabo is he's remembering things better than he used to, and he's correcting his past memory mistakes, or he is full of shit about his memory,
Very possible.
which was kind of my theory since the beginning, but I'm not sure how I feel now.
Now we have to remember it's the Autarch Severian who's telling the story.
Yes,
So
exactly.
same dude. It's not like he's telling it when he's younger.
That's true. That's true. And if his memory in the future as the Autarch is perfect,
Right.
then there should never be any mistakes in the story. And there are mistakes constantly throughout the story.
So
Unless
he's deliberately misleading us, or he has a crap memory. Yeah.
or he is the power of the perfection of the memory later on in his life causes him to actually like he re-inhabits the time in which he had the experience, in which case
Where his memory was wrong.
exactly.
That's convoluted, but it could be true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Maybe they're
Well,
all true.
on
Yeah,
that,
I don't expect Wolfe to give us a clear-cut answer ever.
yeah,
So
At all.
yeah.
which makes me wonder. But on that mysterious note, I would like to thank you two for this discussion. I do not necessarily feel I know what's going on, but I am, every time we have one of these discussions, I appreciate the story more and more. So that's
Good.
probably a good thing. So thank you very much to both of you. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody. And as I said before, the last discussion is going to be on Matt's channel, Matt on Books. Go check out his channel. He's got lots of great content there. And if future you wants to check out Paul's channel, which will exist in the future, if you can time travel
Yes.
like Severian,
Yes.
maybe there'll be a channel there as well. But
If the Hierodules choose me.
that's right. That's right. We're waiting.
Exactly.
For that moment. We're waiting for that moment. So in the meantime, though, thank you very much. And everyone, until next time.